WRVA, the voice of Virginia.
All right, thanks for joining us, everybody. It's News Radio WRVA. My name is Rich Herrera. Super Dave behind the glass, and then Gary with our sports news. We'll talk to him in just a little bit, but right now we have the pleasure of welcoming on our former governor, former attorney general, and ambassador for the United States of America. Jim Gilmore joins us on Thursdays here on News Radio WRVA. I always look forward to our conversations. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Rich. Thanks for the chance to talk to your listeners once again.
This is awesome. I love when we do this because I need some help here. I need you to help me unpack what's going on right now. And it's interesting. You've always said this, and I think both you and I look at what's going on in the world and we have our own point of view. You say Russia is the pivot. Russia's the pivot. I've been looking so much at what's going on in the Middle East and keeping my eye on the Indo-Pacific, but there's a couple things I wanted to ask you about. Right now, we are really going to see where the pivots are and how they're all tied together because as the president has kind of pivoted his strategy in dealing with Iran, now he's going to unleash Scott Bessent, who I called the Darth Vader of the financial markets, on Iran, and he says no leakage. It is very interesting. China has already told the U.S., you can go kick rocks. We're not going to go along with everything that you're doing right now. And I see that Russia is now getting pressure on them with everything going on in Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East. All of these things are kind of tied together, sir.
Well, they are. So let's talk about a few things, Rich. The Scott Bessent initiative, basically on behalf of the president to apply economic pressure, is just adding one more element of American power into the war in order to try to bring it to an end. We've tried military. We're still doing military. That has not worked. Personally, I don't think it can work with strictly an air attack. So they, I think, now have kind of acknowledged that, and so they're now ready to try something else in addition, not instead, but in addition, and that is the economic challenge. Now, as I said over here before, I did an op-ed in the Washington Times, but I guess it was 3 weeks ago now, in which I proposed that there be a diplomatic addition to this war here, and that we try to get some more people on our side, as opposed to trying to do this by ourselves. And that was, of course, based upon my experience as ambassador in Europe, dealing with all those countries globally, worldwide. That so far has not happened. Instead, we're applying economic pressure. Now, the challenge with it is that, you know, if they really get draconian on this, and what they've really said is anybody that trades now with Iran is going to be subject to sanctions by the United States. Rich, personally, I don't know how practical that is. And China basically just, as you said, well, we're going to do what we want to do. We don't care about you. I think the real danger here is they may threaten the American hold on the international financial system. People who want to conduct their own economic policy are going to start looking for alternatives to the dollar. It is essential that the dollar remain the essential currency of the world. If that happens, that enables the United States to run all these big deficits and live the quality of life that we're leading now on borrowed money. If that stops, we're going to have a very serious problem here in the United States. So the point is that I don't know whether we really have the economic power to enforce that or not. We shall see. I continue to believe that a strong diplomatic initiative would do this, would maybe help in this international war.
Well, I look at it, I think you're absolutely right. There are countries that would like to displace the United States. Right now, the reserve currency for oil, and that's really what keeps the dollar with the power that it does. And you see, I think it was Brazil was one of the countries that have been talking about, the BRICS folks that want to replace the dollar with a more of a combination basket of a bunch of different currencies. I think it's China, Russia, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, India, and maybe Saudi Arabia had been talking about maybe we stop trading oil in dollars exclusively, and that's really where the strength of the U.S. economy is around the world.
Yeah, look, this is economically kind of ominous, to tell you the truth. Other countries around the world, leading by China, do not like giving the Americans the power of money through the power of the dollar, which is the worldwide currency. The way once upon a time in Britain the pound sterling was,
right.
Britain went down, and now the dollar is here. And everything I've read says that people really can't displace the dollar, but I guess we could force them to. We could require, they can't run their economies unless they do get rid of the dollar. That's the danger that we've got here, that I think I see from this. So I think that Bessett's got to think this through. I think the president has to think this through and make sure that this particular chess move doesn't have bad consequences.
No, and again, I remind everybody, and I went down the rabbit hole, did this research, that when we went off of the gold standard, one of the first things that Kissinger did with Richard Nixon in office. I watched Victor Davis Hanson had a wonderful video about Richard Nixon and his presidency the other day, and they pointed out, and I said this on the air before, that when we went off the gold standard, Kissinger went to the Middle East and told OPEC, we're only going to trade in dollars, and that's really what's helped the U.S. economy ever since then. Wanted to ask you this. John Ratcliffe from the administration made a CIA director, John Ratcliffe, made an unannounced trip to Moscow where he met with Russian intelligence officials, not Vladimir Putin, but he met with his own counterparts. Can I read anything into that? They say it's a semi-routine visit, but I don't remember seeing anything like this before.
Well, look, if it were routine, it would be fine that we're talking to the Russian secret police. And frankly, anything that Ratcliffe says there to them, if that's really the extent of it, is going to be transmitted immediately to Putin. So I think what is going on here is that Ratcliffe is on behalf of President Trump and the United States warning not to attack NATO. Now, this is a big subject, Rich, that you've introduced here. I've been saying now for 5 years, I've been talking about the danger that we've been facing because of the European war that we're in. And now it would really appear like the Russians think that because of our engagement in the Middle East and our waste of our resources there and our misplacement of our military there and our waste of our money there, that maybe this is an opportunity to push harder in Europe. And that might mean an attack on a NATO country. I've been very worried for years about an attack either on Poland or the southeastern countries like Romania, Bulgaria, and maybe most importantly, the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. And when I went up there last year to see them. And I've been worried about that because if the U.S. is engaged elsewhere, they may think that they can attack some of these countries, which are now NATO countries. And in theory, that ignites a military third world war. Well, while we talk about all this, Rich, this is now possible. And I warn your listeners that this game gets really bad really fast if that happens, which is probably why Ratcliffe went over to Russia and said, don't ignite this. Now, my hope is that Ratcliffe will say to the Russians, if you do that, if you attack a NATO country, we will re-engage. If he said that, that can maybe deter Putin from doing that. But I think Putin's getting desperate.
Well, again, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I 100% agree, because now as Ukraine, with their drone technology, is actually striking into the heart of Mother Russia, nowhere in the world in Vladimir Putin's wildest dreams did he ever think that would happen. And again, we've talked about this since you and I started talking about this every week. Russian military doctrine is, I will escalate to scare you into de-escalating. So as they're making noise about that, remember, Poland has built their military forces so high because they said that we're not going to get run over the way we've had in the last century. They're one of the fiercest, most aggressive NATO countries, along with the Balkans and the newest members of NATO that are right there on the frontier of Russia. Yeah. It's interesting that the traditional NATO allies aren't necessarily as hawkish as Poland and some of the others.
Yeah, well, the British are. The British have now really stepped up a lot. And in response to that, Putin is threatening Britain. He's sending his warships around Britain. There is basically an ongoing terror campaign that is stepping up in Britain in order to try to persuade the British to get away from Ukraine. And let me say something really quick here.
Yes, sir.
I think if Putin gets desperate, it is possible that he might actually launch a tactical nuclear weapon or two. in order to escalate, to make the Western allies back off of Ukraine. I think that's becoming more and more possible. That might be the subject of this discussion in Moscow with CIA Director Radcliffe. I also want to tell you that I believe that if Putin launches a nuclear weapon, it will not stop the NATO and Western allies from their direction. I think it will not cause the West to abandon Ukraine. I do not believe it'll do that, but I do believe that it will open up a new day with the use of nuclear weapons on the European continent if that happens. So it seems to me that that we have to. I think what the Americans have to do right now is think about that and prepare for that contingency. And if we're prepared, and we announce that we are prepared to make a decision to stick with this no matter what, I think it's unlikely that Putin will launch a nuclear weapon. But if we just get flat-footed and all of a sudden this happens, frankly, I'm not really comfortable with the way that we might make a decision, Rich, on this. One more thing about this thing. This thing is really way out of hand now. After all the weeks you and I have been talking about this, the Ukraine war continues to be the key. We are not there. We are engaged in what I believe is a very wasteful engagement here in the Middle East. The Middle East may go on, by the way, without us at some point. Our munitions are being dwindled. That's a big topic this past week. We're in a conflict at this point on trade with our best friends, Canada, our very best friends, like our brothers, really. We're talking about going to North Korea, and I can't think of any good reason to be doing that other than I think North Korea is getting pretty belligerent. They might actually attack the South. And then Russia and the United Kingdom is really a hot topic right now. And, frankly, I would be very startled if the U.S. ever abandoned the United Kingdom to the tender mercies of the Russians.
No,
this ain't getting better, Rich. This is getting worse.
Well, and again, as we talked about, I still think I keep my view is, and my view is different than yours. Is I see this escalation because Putin is desperate and needs to find a way to save face to get out of Ukraine, because this is not what he thought of. By the way, real quick, I got 20 seconds here. Have you seen the movie On the Brink? I went and saw it last week. Fascinating movie about Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan in Reykjavik.
Well, that would be a good. I know I haven't seen it, but that would be a good movie because it reminds us that an American president with a lot of strength and strategic thinking can actually get a new dawn for a new day in the world, and that's what Ronald Reagan was doing. As you know, I'm a Reagan Republican.
As am I.
I'm not turning over to the Democrat Socialists. Don't worry about that. But
you're the last person I think would ever do that. But it's an interesting movie. I went to go see it. It's a little slow. Because they get into the minutia of Reykjavik, but it was fascinating for someone who loves politics and history. If you want to go with me, I'll go see it again and I'll buy the popcorn.
That sounds good to me, but it was a key moment in foreign policy.
100%.
We can talk about that some.
Really neat. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about state politics, and a lot of these municipalities are asking for 1%. Others are talking about data center taxes. We'll talk about that with Governor Gilmore, top of the hour. We'll continue our conversation with the governor like we do on Thursdays. Quick reminder, today's program is brought to you in part by Greer Financial Group.